Monster movies are supposed to rake in money, right? Big creatures, massive destruction, audiences on the edge of their seats. It sounds like an instant gold mine. But sometimes, Hollywood throws everything into a monster epic, and the box office throws it right back. How can a movie about terrifying beasts or city-crushing creatures fail to make waves? And yet, some of these so-called flops turned out to be absolute gems. Which forgotten monster misfire deserves a second roar? Let's dive in. The Mist, 2007. Imagine a Stephen King adaptation so unsettling that audiences walked out in silence, not applause. That was The Mist. Directed by Frank Darabont, the same man behind The Shawshank Redemption, you'd think this horror tale would be a surefire hit. Instead, it barely clawed back its modest $18 million budget, grossing just over $57 million worldwide. For a King story with monsters, that's surprisingly low. But here's where things get interesting. The Mist wasn't just another creature feature, it was a full-blown psychological gut punch. The film traps ordinary people inside a supermarket as an eerie fog rolls in, carrying grotesque monsters that make survival nearly impossible. Yet the real horror comes from the people inside, turning on each other as fear escalates. The special effects were eerie enough to give you nightmares, but the true legacy of The Mist rests on its ending. Without spoiling the details, let's just say Darabont delivered one of the most shocking final sequences in modern horror. Too bleak for mainstream crowds? Absolutely. But years later, fans and critics look back and applaud its audacity. The Mist may not have been a ticket-selling monster, but it's remembered as one of the boldest, most terrifying Stephen King adaptations ever made. Sometimes, failure at the box office is the very thing that cements a film's cult status. Tremors, 1990. You'd think a monster movie featuring giant underground worms and a young Kevin Bacon would be a runaway success. Tremors had all the right ingredients: a quirky desert town, relentless suspense, and some of the most creative practical effects of its time. But when it hit theaters in 1990, it earned just $16 million against its $11 million budget. Not a financial disaster, but far from the blockbuster Universal Studios had hoped for. Here's the twist. Tremors didn't need a huge theatrical run to become legendary. Once it hit VHS and later cable, the movie took off like wildfire. Fans couldn't get enough of the graboids, those massive subterranean monsters that could sense vibrations through the ground. The mix of horror and comedy, along with a ragtag group of survivors trying to outsmart the creatures, gave it a unique charm audiences came to adore. The film's practical effects were key. No flashy computer graphics, just gritty, slimy, mechanical monsters that felt alive. And the humor, from Bacon's one-liners to Fred Ward's gruff sarcasm, made it endlessly rewatchable. Tremors spawned multiple sequels, a television series, and even video games. It may have been a box office tremor instead of an earthquake, but its aftershocks continue to be felt. Tremors went from overlooked oddity to one of the most beloved monster cult classics of all time. Sometimes, the real victory isn't in theaters, but in the living room. Cloverfield, 2008. Found footage monster movie? That's a risky pitch. But in 2008, Cloverfield dared to bring the kaiju genre into the shaky cam age. Directed by Matt Reeves and produced by J.J. Abrams, it was marketed with cryptic trailers that had audiences buzzing. The film grossed $172 million worldwide on a $25 million budget, technically a hit, but not nearly the pop culture takeover studios were banking on. Cloverfield's shaky camera style divided viewers. Some loved the gritty, on-the-ground perspective of a group of friends trying to survive a giant creature tearing through New York City. Others found the handheld chaos too disorienting. But whether you adored or despised it, there's no denying Cloverfield changed the way monster movies were made. It wasn't just about the monster, it was about the human scale of disaster. Instead of generals in war rooms or scientists explaining the creature's DNA, we got raw panic from the streets, seen through the lens of a handheld camcorder. That made the destruction feel startlingly real. Cloverfield may not have dethroned Godzilla or King Kong in terms of box office dominance, but it reshaped how audiences think about monster cinema. It spawned sequels, spin-offs, and endless internet theories. What other flop can say it gave birth to an entire cinematic universe? King Kong, 1976. When you remake one of the most iconic monster movies of all time, expectations are sky high. Dino De Laurentiis' King Kong remake in 1976, starring Jessica Lange and Jeff Bridges, aimed to update the classic for a modern audience. The result? Mixed reviews, high costs, and disappointing box office returns compared to its massive budget. The movie leaned heavily on practical effects, including a giant mechanical Kong that often malfunctioned, and elaborate sets that looked both ambitious and over the top. Critics weren't impressed, and many dismissed it as a bloated remake. But decades later, the film has found a new appreciation among fans of practical effects and 70-second cinema spectacle. Jessica Lange's debut performance hinted at the stardom ahead, and Rick Baker's work inside the Kong suit gave the creature surprising emotional depth. While it lacked the groundbreaking magic of the 1933 original, the 1976, King Kong carved its own place in monster movie history. Over time, audiences began to see its campy grandeur as part of its charm. What once felt like a misstep is now viewed as a bold, if flawed, attempt to bring Kong into a new era. Not every giant ape needs to smash box office records to leave a giant footprint. The Relic, 1997. Set inside Chicago's Field Museum, the Relic had everything going for it. A chilling atmosphere, a monster designed by the legendary Stan Winston studio, and a strong lead performance from Penelope Ann Miller. Released in 1997, it looked poised to become a fresh hit for the monster horror genre. Instead, it pulled in just $48 million on a $40 million budget, barely scraping by. So what went wrong? Timing. The late 90 seconds were saturated with slashers and disaster films, leaving little room for a slow-burn creature feature. The Relic's museum setting and shadowy visuals gave it a unique style, but it lacked the flashy marketing of its competitors. Yet fans who discovered it later found a monster gem. The Kothoga, a hybrid creature born of ancient myth and scientific mutation, is both terrifying and fascinating. The museum setting creates claustrophobic tension as visitors and staff are trapped overnight with the beast lurking in the dark. Critics initially shrugged, but horror fans eventually embraced the Relic for its atmospheric tension and inventive monster design. It's the kind of movie you stumble across late at night and wonder, why didn't more people talk about this? The Relic didn't roar at the box office, but in hindsight, it stands as a solid entry in 90 seconds monster horror, proving once again that ticket sales don't always equal greatness. And that's just the beginning. We've already seen supermarket nightmares, desert-dwelling worms, shaky cam kaiju, and even a misunderstood King Kong. But trust me, the next batch of monster misfires is just as wild. Which one of these first 5 do you think deserved better at the box office? Drop your pick in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stick around for the rest of the list. The real monsters are still coming. Pacific Rim, 2013. You'd think giant robots fighting even bigger sea monsters would print money. On paper, Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim had everything: a $190 million budget, mind-blowing visuals, and a director with a monster movie pedigree. But when it landed in theaters in 2013, it only managed $102 million domestically, far below expectations. For Warner Brothers, that was a disappointment. Here's the twist. Pacific Rim wasn't made for quick-hit box office glory. It was a love letter to kaiju cinema and mecha anime, blending monster movie tradition with futuristic spectacle. The story followed humanity's last-ditch effort to stop interdimensional beasts called kaiju by piloting enormous Jaegers. 2 pilots synced through a neural drift. If that sounds like comic book coolness brought to life, it's because it was. Critics were divided, with some calling it all flash and no depth. But fans embraced the heart. Del Toro poured detail into everything: the Jaeger designs, the kaiju biology, even the storm-lashed cityscapes. The fight scenes weren't quick cuts. They were heavy, bone-crunching, skyscraper-shattering battles you could feel. While it didn't crush the American box office, Pacific Rim thrived overseas, especially in Asia, where audiences fueled it past $400 million worldwide. Today, it's seen as one of the boldest modern monster spectacles. It may not have been a domestic juggernaut, but it proved that passion projects sometimes take a while to be fully appreciated. Godzilla: Final Wars, 2004. By 2004, Toho decided to go big for Godzilla's 50th anniversary, and I mean really big. Godzilla: Final Wars featured almost every monster in the kaiju stable, from Mothra to Rodan to even a jab at Hollywood's 1998 Zilla. It was like a greatest hits concert for monster fans. But the box office? Brutal. The film earned only about $12 million in Japan, far below expectations for the King of the Monsters milestone. Part of the problem was tone. Final Wars leaned into outrageous action, flashy editing, and martial arts sequences that felt more like The Matrix than traditional kaiju cinema. Hardcore fans loved the monster mash, but casual viewers found it too chaotic and campy. Still, for monster devotees, Final Wars is a treasure. Where else can you see Godzilla mowing down 11 monsters in a single movie, or see him swat aside the much-maligned Hollywood Godzilla in under a minute? It's pure fan service in the best sense. Critics dismissed it as over-the-top nonsense, but that's precisely why it works. It's a celebration, not just a movie, a reminder that Godzilla doesn't always have to be serious to be great. While not a financial win, Final Wars has aged into cult legend status, especially among those who like their monster fights as loud and wild as possible. Pumpkinhead, 1988. Some monster movies are carried by their creatures, and Pumpkinhead is one of them. Directed by legendary effects wizard Stan Winston, best known for his work on Aliens and Predator, this was his first time in the director's chair. With his pedigree, you'd expect a hit. Instead, Pumpkinhead earned only $4.4 million at the box office, barely making a dent. But what the movie lacked in revenue, it made up for in atmosphere. The story follows a grieving father, played by Lance Henriksen, who summons a demon to avenge his son's death. The price? The monster known as Pumpkinhead, a grotesque and terrifying figure, exacts vengeance with brutal efficiency. The creature design was a masterpiece, lanky, otherworldly, and unforgettable. Winston's background in effects meant the monster didn't just look scary, it felt alive. The rural, backwoods setting added to the eerie, gothic fairy tale vibe. Though critics were lukewarm, horror fans kept the movie alive. Over the years, Pumpkinhead became a staple of late-night television, VHS rentals, and horror marathons. It spawned several sequels, though none captured the magic of the original. Pumpkinhead may have bombed at the box office, but it cemented itself as one of the great practical effects monster films. Sometimes, failure doesn't bury a movie, it gives it the roots to grow into legend. The Host, 2006. Before Bong Joon-ho won Oscars for Parasite, he gave us The Host, a monster movie with brains, heart, and one very nasty creature. In South Korea, it was a massive hit, pulling in over $90 million. But internationally, it didn't break through the way studios hoped, leaving it labeled as underperforming in the global market. The Host wasn't your typical monster romp. It mixed biting satire, dark humor, and emotional family drama with its horror. The story centered on a dysfunctional family trying to rescue their daughter after she's abducted by a mutated river creature. Instead of focusing only on the monster, Bong made the humans just as central, flawed, funny, and desperately real. The creature itself, designed with creepy amphibian fluidity, looked unlike anything seen in mainstream monster cinema. The effects were daring for the time, and the action sequences along Seoul's Han River were stunning. But it was the blend of tones, scary one minute, absurd the next, that divided audiences who expected straightforward thrills. Over time, The Host gained recognition as one of the best monster films of the 21st century. It showed that you don't need skyscrapers crumbling to tell a monster story that really hits. The Host wasn't just about fear, it was about humanity staring down its mistakes. Gremlins 2, The New Batch, 1990. How do you follow up one of the biggest horror comedies of the 80 seconds? By going completely off the rails. Gremlins 2, The New Batch wasn't just a sequel, it was a meta-parody of the original. Director Joe Dante packed it with cartoonish chaos, bizarre gags, and self-aware jokes that left audiences scratching their heads. Critics didn't know what to do with it, and box office returns reflected the confusion. Against a $50 million budget, it earned only $41 million worldwide. But here's the fun part. Gremlins 2 was ahead of its time. Instead of rehashing the first movie, it satirized it. The mischievous little monsters invaded a futuristic skyscraper, unleashing wild mutations like a bat gremlin, a vegetable gremlin, and even a talking brain gremlin. The result was less horror, more anarchic comedy, and audiences in 1990 weren't ready for that. Yet, for fans today, Gremlins 2 is genius. It broke the rules of sequels, poked fun at its own existence, and embraced cartoon logic years before self-parody became mainstream in Hollywood. It may have been a box office bomb, but it's now celebrated as one of the boldest and most creative monster sequels ever made. Sometimes failing to meet expectations is the only way to create something truly unforgettable. The Thing, 1982. Few movies prove the phrase "ahead of its time" better than John Carpenter's The Thing. Released in the summer of 1982, it had everything going against it. First, it opened just weeks after E.T., a feel-good alien blockbuster that made audiences crave warmth and wonder, not paranoia and body horror. Second, critics absolutely shredded it, calling it disgusting, depressing, and joyless. At the box office, it earned just $19 million against its $15 million budget. A flop, by Hollywood standards. But time has rewritten the story. The Thing is now regarded as one of the greatest monster movies ever made. Its chilling tale of Antarctic researchers facing a shape-shifting alien, one that can perfectly imitate any living thing, still terrifies audiences decades later. Rob Bottin's practical effects remain legendary. The mutating dog, the chest-opening monstrosity, the spider-legged head crawling across the floor, these images are burned into cinema history. What critics once saw as too bleak is now praised as bold storytelling. The paranoia, the mistrust, the claustrophobic dread. It's a perfect blend of science fiction and horror. While the 1982 box office said failure, the long-term legacy screams masterpiece. The Thing didn't just bounce back. It rose from the ice to become one of the most studied, celebrated, and influential monster films ever made. Sometimes, the box office just gets it flat out wrong. Colossal, 2016. If you thought a movie about Anne Hathaway controlling a kaiju halfway across the world sounded too strange for mainstream success, you'd be right. Colossal hit theaters in 2016 with one of the oddest monster movie premises ever. A woman discovers that when she drunkenly stomps around a playground in America, a giant creature in Seoul mirrors her movements. The film barely scraped $4 million worldwide, a commercial faceplant. But beneath the quirky premise, Colossal had real depth. It wasn't just about monsters trashing cities. It was about self-destruction, toxic relationships, and finding control over your own life. Hathaway delivered one of her most layered performances, blending humor, vulnerability, and empowerment. Jason Sudeikis, known mostly for comedy, shocked viewers with his dark turn as her manipulative childhood friend. Critics admired its originality, even if audiences weren't sure what to make of it. Was it comedy, drama, a kaiju movie? The truth is, it was all of the above. Colossal didn't fit neatly into any category, which doomed it at the box office but later made it irresistible for cult movie fans. Today, it's seen as one of the most inventive spins on the monster genre. By blending giant creature mayhem with deeply human storytelling, Colossal proved that not all monster movies need skyscrapers falling. Sometimes the real destruction is inside us. Deep Rising, 1998. If you've ever wanted to see a tentacled sea creature rip through a luxury cruise liner, Deep Rising is your jam. Directed by Stephen Sommers before he hit it big with The Mummy, this 1,998 creature feature had the ingredients for a thrill ride: a group of mercenaries, a stranded ship, and a monster lurking in the dark. Unfortunately, it sank at the box office, earning just $11 million against a $45 million budget. The problem wasn't the movie itself, it was timing. By the late 90s, big-budget disaster movies dominated, and Deep Rising felt out of step. Its mix of horror, action, and dark humor confused marketing teams and left audiences unsure what they were getting into. But for those who gave it a shot, Deep Rising was pure fun. The creature design, with its massive tentacles and grotesque appetite, was both terrifying and wildly entertaining. Treat Williams brought a likable charm as the reluctant hero, and Famke Janssen stole scenes as a quick-witted thief caught in the chaos. Over time, the movie developed a loyal fan base thanks to home video. Its blend of campy one-liners and over-the-top monster carnage made it a late-night favorite. Deep Rising may have flopped in theaters, but it floats today as a cult classic, proof that some monsters need a second chance to shine. DragonHeart, 1996. Here's a curveball. DragonHeart wasn't marketed as a monster movie, but it had one of the most memorable creatures of the 90s, Draco the Dragon, voiced by Sean Connery. With groundbreaking CGI for its time and a heartfelt story about a disgraced knight bonding with a dragon, it should have been a huge hit. Instead, DragonHeart grossed just $115 million worldwide against a hefty $57 million budget, underwhelming compared to expectations. Critics were divided. Some loved the emotional core, while others thought it was too sentimental. But audiences who connected with it never forgot Draco. The dragon wasn't just a spectacle. He had personality, humor, and a tragic nobility. Connery's voice work gave the character a soul that CGI alone couldn't deliver. Over time, DragonHeart built a loyal fan base, spawning sequels and cementing Draco as one of the great movie dragons. It may not have been a box-office dragon slayer, but it soared in the hearts of fans who appreciated its sincerity. DragonHeart proved that monsters don't always have to be terrifying to matter. Sometimes the most unforgettable creatures are the ones that make you cry instead of scream. So there you have it, 15 monster movie box office bombs that turned out to be absolute gems. From Antarctic Paranoia to Backwoods Demons, from misunderstood Gremlins to Dragons with Heart, these films prove that ticket sales don't always equal greatness. Which one do you think deserves the biggest redemption? Let us know in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and share this with a fellow monster fan. After all, the scariest thing isn't a giant creature. It's forgetting how great these so-called flops really were.